Thank you. So, yeah, my name is Jildamarie Brauer. I'm a data lead at Akvo. And today I want to talk about sustainable data use in agriculture. And yeah, many of you may be working with data, and investing in data or in data collection often sounds expensive. And today, yeah, I want to share some learnings of us and how you can make it worth the investment. And I want to start with sharing some insights from ourselves, like from our own learnings, because we are working a lot with data and collecting data or building dashboards. So we also make mistakes, but also learnings from our partners on where data offers efforts tend to fall short. So this can be before collection or during and after, or yeah, in the long term, I would say, when we talk about data ownership or long-term use. And what we see before is that there's often limited budget allocated for design or thinking around why are we actually gonna or collecting data or using data or building a dashboard, why are we needing it? And then thinking about also what if decisions it needs to inform. So let's say when you think of data collection, you will follow a set of indicators that you think are common in the sector and that you should use. But rarely we see that indicators are checked against decision needs. And another thing we see before data collection, and this design phase we call it, is that, of course, let's say you need to do data collection and you're interested in your farmer population, but that sampling is done based on the available list. And let's say you work with 10,000 farmers and you want to have a good understanding, and you say, okay, they're in different regions, we need a balanced sample. It turns out that often this representation is hard to reach because we have incomplete lists. Maybe you have only information on 1,000 farmers, of which 10% is female on that list, and you cannot actually have a sample that represents your full population. That will already affect, yeah, the data and the insights that you get later on. And then during and after data collection or data use or any use of data, I would say, we see that data collection proceeds regardless because yeah, often efforts are centered around data collection and we are following a time plan. And yeah, it needs to happen regardless of the concerns we had before. And also hard to collect data is collected anyway. And we also see often a capacity building a need to connect collection, analysis, and decision making. Like, how do we go from this data to decision making? And then the long term, and also on data ownership, we often see no plan for data use beyond the project's end or beyond the single purpose we had initially in mind, or no plan for how it's actually going to inform decision making by different stakeholders. And that also links to that data is often stored in tools and platforms that partners can't access, or we are, yeah, we because we have so many maybe concerns about data security or privacy, we tend to store it securely, but that also means that it's not always accessible or used in the long term. And another thing we see is that the feedback loop to farmers, for example, almost never closes. Yeah, this all sounds negative, but I hope that today we can share some learnings of how we did see, yeah, or how we try to turn this around. And Akvo, for those who don't know us, we are data and tech experts that support clients, which can be governments or NGOs or other organizations working with farmers, for example, with any data service they may need. This could be data collection, but more importantly, we also work with building portals, or we do data maturity assessments. We help with data governance strategies. So the full data cycle. And we have expertise then in agriculture, but also in water and climate. And we deliver our services always with a proven methodology that we have tried and applied many times before, always starting with design, understanding why do you want to work with data, who's in the room, and what decision does data need to inform. We are based in the locations you see with the purple dots, and yeah, we are also working in many countries, as you can see. And today I want to give a few practical examples of how we addressed some of the challenges I just mentioned, all based on a couple of data collections we recently did in Uganda, coincidentally all related to coffee. Let me move the Zoom thing. Yeah. So the first challenge I would like to mention was again that there's often no plan for data use beyond a project's end to inform data-driven decision making. And to illustrate, in this case, we had to do, we were interested in data of coffee farmers that were across various locations, and there were really different farmer types. So to really make sure that this data was of use, we sat together with implementers to identify which differences or which farmer groups mattered. And we see very often that we tend to go with the regular segments, let's say we disaggregate by gender or by region, which can be good reasons. But in this case, we decided after these conversations, let's go and disaggregate the data by washing station, and then go one step further, identify how we can create farmer typologies around those washing stations. What defines those farmers linked to a certain washing station, for example, in terms of volume, farmer types or practices that they apply. And this really led to tailored intervention approaches linked to farmers, linked to a certain washing station, but it also helped us to have identifiable groups of farmers that the implementers could work with in the future. The second example links to that often we see people tend to go with a list of common indicators or donor-driven indicators, or let's say where the list is coming from. They're set at a certain start, and that indicators are used without checking if they actually inform decisions you can make later on. And in this example, we actually reassessed the preset indicators after analyzing data. So we first reported the results against the preset indicators and checked whether they actually gave us distinctive insights. And to illustrate, we assessed a poverty indicator, the living income gap, and in this case, it turned out there is a living income gap among coffee farmers in this region, but we also expected this living income gap to be there still in a few years from now. And would that really give distinctive insights or results that we could steer on, or the implements could steer on? No, they actually needed more details. So we needed to go deeper into yields, in prices, in revenues, in the dynamics of how the farmers were selling and what form, etc. And these were much more, these indicators then did reflect decisions that were made after baseline, and they were useful to monitor. So as a result, we now have a list of indicators that were possible to monitor, generated useful insights. And we're not saying that this should be common practice, that you always change your indicators along the way, because that will also become messy, but critically reflect on the initial list you have, and don't always think that you cannot change it. That's what I want to say. Like, reflect along the way. And the third example I want to highlight is that on the challenge that the feedback loop to farmers rarely close. So in this case, we decided, okay, there's one data set, but let's create multiple outputs for different audiences. And again, this sounds obvious, but it's rarely done. We often tend to go for a long report with technical details, statistics, etc. But here we decided, with little additional effort, to go with multiple outputs, an in-depth report, but also an interactive slide deck that we used in sessions with local decision makers, and farmer fact sheets that show their initial results. And we developed some scenario models together with local experts that could show the farmers what implementing certain practices could lead to for the yield, for example, or for other outcomes. And as a result, the intervention scenarios that were created was really influenced by local decision makers that actively engaged with the data, and it also was influenced by the farmer discussions.
Jildamarie, could you just speed up a little? That's all.
Yeah, this is the last one.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. So what can you do differently? I want to highlight two tracks. One is on invest in design, and the second one is design for long-term use. So when I say invest in design, sit with sector experts to design a survey form, for example, or also define the purpose of each indicator. Make sure that it does inform a certain decision and for whom, and then also think, will we get the data to make your decision? You can run a small data maturity scan in your team. So do you have the skills and people to act on what you collect? And as I said, protect budget not only for collection, but also for design and governance, because it's often seen as such an investment to work with data. But yeah, it is not worth the investment if it turns out that the data quality is low or that it's not giving you the insights that you don't want. So do invest in design to make it worth the investment. And second, design for long-term use. Think of maybe a data governance strategy. How will you manage the data going forward? Where will you store it? Who's responsible? What is the methodology? Protect time and skills for in-depth analysis, and really share results interactively in multiple validation rounds. Don't have results just shared in one go in a final round, but iteratively build results and discuss results together with different stakeholders in an interactive way. It really gives more insights, and that also links to the last one: share data with the target group and let them influence decisions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jill.
Questions, but I think they can be shown later then for the breakout session.
Yeah, I mean, you've obviously provoked, a few sort of questions, in terms of how people
Yeah.
have been using data and how they should be using data, and designing for the long term. So I think, yeah, take those questions into the breakout.